The galaxy was at war, the kind of war that had dragged on for centuries. The Galactic Council had been formed to unite the strongest races in the known universe, but over the years it had become a breeding ground for distrust, greed, and endless power struggles. The empires of the Council had been locked in a bitter conflict for so long that even the most ambitious leaders had begun to believe peace was nothing more than a dream, one that would never come true. And then came the Deathworlders. The Council had received numerous reports of a strange anomaly on the edge of their space, but no one had paid much attention to it at first, a small blip on their radar too far out of reach to worry about, until it wasn't. The reports grew more frequent and more erratic. A ship of unknown design had appeared near a sparsely populated system no more than a few hundred light-years from the border of Council space, and the ship was not responding to any communications attempts. At first the Council thought it was a mistake. A ship from one of the smaller and more reckless species had wandered too far into dangerous space. But when the ship didn't leave, when it didn't move, they realized something was different. This ship didn't belong to anyone they knew. It wasn't even like anything they had ever seen in their star charts. It was massive, black, and imposing, with strange markings across its hull, markings that none of their experts could decipher. The species that made this ship was not one they had catalogued. They could sense no technology. They recognized no energy signature. They had no idea what they were dealing with. The silence of the ship felt like a threat. And then the message came. It wasn't loud or aggressive, but it was clear enough to send a shiver through the highest ranks of the Council leaders and generals. In all their years of power, no one had ever dared speak this way to them. The message was simple, a demand, but not for war, not for resources or tribute. Instead, the message simply stated, "We offer you peace, or we will show you why they call us Deathworlders," and nothing more. The room was still for a long time as the representatives from each of the alien empires sat in silence, their eyes locked on the screen that displayed the strange ship hovering motionless. In the void, they debated fiercely. No one believed the threat was real, not at first. How could it be? After all, the Deathworlders were supposed to be just a myth, a boogeyman story, told by older generations of soldiers to scare their children into behaving. Surely a single unknown ship couldn't pose a threat to the might of the Council, and yet the air in the room was thick with tension. The debates raged on for hours. Some suggested ignoring the message completely. Others wanted to send a fleet to investigate the ship's presence. Others still wanted to show strength by firing on the ship and ending this curiosity before it could become a problem. The Council wasn't united on what to do, but all of them agreed that whatever this was, it needed to be dealt with swiftly and decisively. But when they finally sent their fleet to confront the ship, when they arrived at the system where it had appeared, they found it was already gone, and they didn't even know what had hit them. The fleet was supposed to show the Council's dominance, a simple show of force to put any rumors to rest, but instead it became the first of many miscalculations the Council had made in dealing with the Deathworlders. None of the commanders in the fleet knew what they were facing. No one had even seen the ship with their own eyes. But as soon as the fleet arrived in the system where the Deathworlder vessel had been detected, they quickly realized something was terribly wrong. The Deathworlder ship had vanished. It wasn't anywhere in the immediate vicinity. No debris, no ships, nothing at all. But the fleet was far from safe. The first attack came without warning, a burst of energy that crackled across the dark expanse of space. The fleet's sensors went haywire, and the commander scrambled to make sense of what was happening. Ships suddenly lost power. Entire sections of their systems went dead, as if some unseen hand had gripped their vessels and squeezed the life from them. No shots were fired, no missiles launched yet. The fleet had been crippled before they could even take a single step toward retaliation. Panic spread quickly through the ranks of the fleet commanders. Some tried to issue commands, others screamed orders, but nothing worked. The ships drifted aimlessly in space, their once precise formations now in disarray. The fleet's top leaders were scrambling to understand the nature of the attack. How could something so simple have crippled them so easily? It was as though their enemies didn't even need to fire a single weapon to bring them to their knees. And then, as the confusion reached a fever pitch, the Deathworlder ship appeared. It didn't emerge from anywhere. It didn't make any noise. No engines hummed. It just materialized, as if it had always been there, looming over the fleet in silence, its dark shape so enormous that it seemed to devour the very stars around it. Without moving a single inch, it was terrifying, not because of its size or its technology, but because it radiated a feeling of absolute power, an unspoken message that this ship was untouchable, and everyone around it was insignificant. The Deathworlders didn't attack directly. Instead, they did something far worse. They began to manipulate the battlefield itself. The immense power of their ship interfered with the electronics of the alien ships, like an invisible force pulling at the very foundation of their technology. It wasn't just a simple jamming or disabling of weapons. It was as if the Deathworlder ship was toying with them, breaking their systems down one by one, with no visible effort at all. And then the commanders received a final message from the Deathworlder ship. It wasn't a threat this time, just a statement. "We've already won." And with that, the fleet began to fall apart. The ships scattered in a panic as entire sections of their hulls and weapon systems shut down. The Deathworlder ship didn't chase them. It didn't need to. All it took was the smallest show of power to render the fleet helpless. By the time the fleet retreated in disarray, the Council was left in stunned silence. What had they just witnessed? How could a single ship do this to them, with nothing more than its presence? No weapons fired, no great battle fought. The sheer power of the Deathworlders wasn't in their weapons or their ships. It was in their ability to make their enemies believe defeat had already come. The Council could not ignore the truth any longer. The Deathworlders were not to be underestimated, and now the galaxy had a new player who would not be easily dealt with. The galaxy trembled in the wake of the Deathworlder encounter, but the Council refused to admit fear. Not yet. They brushed off the loss as an anomaly, a mistake they would rectify with a proper response. But the strange thing was that no further action came from the Deathworlders, not immediately. Instead, their ship vanished just as mysteriously as it had arrived, leaving only silence behind. But it was that silence that unnerved the Council the most. They didn't know how to deal with an enemy that didn't follow the rules of warfare they had become accustomed to. There were no declarations of war, no military engagements, only a calm assurance that they had been bested without even trying. And then it became clear that the Deathworlders weren't done playing their game. They weren't finished with the galaxy at all. Humanity's true strength didn't lie in the sheer power of their battleships or their technological superiority, but in the way they approached conflict, a strategy based on survival instinct and unpredictable tactics that defied the galaxy's understanding of war. The Deathworlders were not like any species the Council had dealt with before. They didn't care about diplomacy or rules of engagement. They cared about winning, and they would do whatever it took to achieve that goal. While the Council deliberated in their high chambers, the humans were already moving on the ground in the shadows. Humanity had spread across the galaxy from the moment they first arrived. Their presence had gone unnoticed by most of the galactic powers. They were seen as insignificant, as barely more than a footnote in the endless expanse of the stars. But now it was becoming clear that humanity was not a species to be ignored. Small groups of humans scattered across multiple star systems began to make their mark unnoticed by the alien empires that still focused on the larger conflicts and battles happening in the open. They were nothing more than raiders, guerrilla fighters in the eyes of their enemies. But to the humans, they were soldiers of a kind that knew how to fight when their backs were against the wall, and they were fighting to win. These humans didn't wait for orders from any central command. They didn't need a fleet or a flagship to strike at the heart of an enemy. No, they were resourceful and relentless, working in teams to sabotage supply lines and cripple fleets before they could even deploy fully in battle. They understood that victory didn't always come from overwhelming force. Sometimes it came from the smallest of actions, just the right moment of chaos that could topple the strongest of empires. As the humans worked in the shadows and began to systematically disrupt the larger galactic conflicts, alien fleets found themselves struggling in a way they had never anticipated. Resources dwindled as trade routes were ambushed and vital supplies went missing. Entire armies faltered when their commanders received no word from their outposts, and the once confident galactic empires began to realize they were being outplayed. The Deathworlders' tactics were not those of honorable warriors. They were those of survivalists, those who had learned the hard way how to win without rules, without limits, without mercy. And in the middle of the Council's greatest battles, humanity began to shine. It was never about the scale of the conflict for the Deathworlders. It was about precision and timing small victories stacked on top of each other to create an unstoppable momentum. And slowly but surely they turned the tide in favor of their species. The galaxy was still reeling from their first encounter with the Deathworlders, but humanity wasn't waiting for permission to act. They were already in motion, and the Council would soon realize that they had underestimated a species that was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The Council, still reeling from their first encounter with the Deathworlders, knew they could no longer dismiss them as a mere nuisance. The power displayed by the lone human ship had shaken the foundations of their military doctrine and their unity as a collective force. No one had expected this kind of threat from a species they had barely even heard of before, yet here they were struggling to understand the true depth of what they were facing. In a panic born of pride and fear, the Council agreed to take decisive action. Their response would be swift and overwhelming. They dispatched a fleet of the most advanced warships from every corner of the galaxy, each one representing the cutting edge of alien military technology. They would crush the Deathworlders' presence and put an end to this challenge once and for all. But they underestimated humanity's ability to turn their own mistakes into advantages. The fleet arrived at the coordinates where the Deathworlder ship had been last seen, but again, they found nothing, no sign of the mysterious vessel, no trace of the destruction they had witnessed before. It was as though the ship had simply vanished. Again, frustration bubbled within the ranks of the alien commanders, but they pushed forward, believing that humanity couldn't hide forever. They would find them eventually, and when they did, the battle would be nothing short of a massacre. The Deathworlders were elusive and cunning, but the fleet was confident in their superiority. After all, they had the numbers and the firepower on their side. But as they moved deeper into the system, things began to unravel in ways they could never have anticipated. At first, it seemed like a simple issue: small disruptions in their communication systems and minor glitches in their weapons arrays, nothing that couldn't be fixed with some quick adjustments. But then the problems escalated in ways that made no sense. Entire ships began to lose power at random moments. Some found themselves adrift, unable to maneuver. Others suddenly experienced catastrophic malfunctions, as if their entire ship had been infected by some unseen force. They were being picked off one by one without even knowing how or why. The commanders scrambled to regain control of their fleets, but nothing worked. Every time they thought they had resolved one issue, another would appear seemingly out of nowhere. Entire divisions of troops reported that their command centers had gone dark. Without any clear explanation, their weapons malfunctioned or misfired at crucial moments. And worst of all, they couldn't locate the source of the attacks. No enemy ship appeared on their scanners. No fleet waited in ambush. Instead, the Deathworlders had turned their greatest advantage against them: the battlefield itself. It wasn't that the Deathworlder ship was doing anything particularly complicated. It didn't fire any new weapons or launch any new tactics. It simply worked in ways that completely disregarded the established rules of engagement. They didn't need to fight directly. They didn't need to make their presence known. They simply manipulated the environment itself, turning the fleet's most sophisticated technology against them, turning it into their greatest weakness. As the fleet faltered and became more and more disoriented, they received another message from the Deathworlders. But this time, it wasn't a demand for peace or surrender. It was a single-sentence one that sent a chill down the spines of every commander present. "We don't need to fight you. We only need you to fight yourselves." The realization hit like a wave as the alien fleet descended into chaos. Systems shut down, and entire fleets turned on each other as misinformation spread through their ranks. Confusion reigned supreme, and the Deathworlders' victory had been achieved without firing a single shot. The Council's greatest fleets had been outmaneuvered and broken without a true battle even taking place. The Council had underestimated the power of the Deathworlders, not because they were weak, but because they were capable of manipulating the very rules of war itself, forcing their enemies to defeat themselves. The defeat of the Council's fleet spread like wildfire throughout the galaxy. News of the mysterious enemy that had crushed their most advanced warships without firing a single shot sent ripples of fear and uncertainty through the entire galactic community. Alien empires that had once been powerful and unshakable were now questioning their own strength and ability to maintain their dominance. Humanity had become a force that could no longer be ignored. The galactic powers had always prided themselves on their collective superiority. They believed that no single species could stand against them. United, they had conquered star systems and toppled ancient civilizations. But now they were facing something unlike anything they had ever encountered, a species that was not bound by the same rules they had established, a species that fought not to conquer but simply to survive, and they did so with a ruthless ingenuity that no one had anticipated. Fear gripped the hearts of the leaders who once sat confidently on the council as they scrambled to respond to the unknown threat. Some suggested sending in reinforcements, others believed they could outlast the humans with their superior numbers. But there was no clear plan, no clear way to deal with the Deathworlders, who had already proven they could turn the galaxy's most advanced military strategies against them. In the midst of this panic, smaller and less powerful species began to see an opportunity. Humanity's victory over the Council's fleet had sent a message that even the largest and most powerful empires were not invincible. It was no longer just about survival. It was about a new way of looking at power and control. Some species began to secretly reach out to the Deathworlders, offering their loyalty in exchange for protection or resources. Others tried to negotiate for peace, not knowing that humanity would offer no middle ground, only an ultimatum. The message from the Deathworlders was always the same: submit to humanity's terms or face total obliteration. But the catch was that humanity didn't just want compliance, they wanted allegiance and respect. They weren't interested in conquering or ruling over the galaxy. They wanted one thing: peace on their terms, and they would do whatever it took to achieve it. The once strong alliances that had held the galaxy together began to crack as some species defected to the human cause, while others chose to remain neutral, fearing the consequences of defying them. Entire star systems fell to the sway of the Deathworlders, and slowly but surely the balance of power began to shift. Humanity's influence spread like an unstoppable tide. Those who aligned with them gained access to new technologies and resources, while those who resisted found themselves on the brink of destruction. The Deathworlders made their presence known in small but powerful ways, disrupting key supply chains, ambushing supply convoys, and sabotaging military installations without ever revealing the full extent of their power. Every move they made was carefully calculated to destabilize their enemies, while keeping their true strength hidden behind a veil of uncertainty. The Council had not realized that humanity's greatest weapon was not the battleship they had seen or the technology they had begun to encounter. It was humanity's ability to adapt to any situation and strike when least expected. Every encounter with them was unpredictable, and every victory they claimed was built on the sheer will to survive at any cost. And so, the galaxy found itself at a crossroads, one where the old powers were forced to reconsider everything they thought they knew about warfare, and where humanity stood as a force of nature, untamed and unstoppable, ready to rewrite the rules of the universe itself. The galaxy had entered a new phase of uncertainty. The old order was crumbling, and no one knew how to stop it. The Deathworlders had shown the galaxy something that could not be unseen. They had exposed the weakness of the great empires and demonstrated a level of unpredictability that no one could counter. In the wake of their victories, the Council was no longer united. It had splintered. Factions now formed as various species and leaders sought their own answers. Some still believed they could defeat the Deathworlders in open war. Others looked to negotiate peace in exchange for survival. It was in this chaotic environment that the Deathworlders made their next move with an elegance that only further exposed the gulf between them and the rest of the galaxy. Humanity didn't rush to conquer planets or engage in large battles. They didn't need to. Their ship, the massive battleship that had first appeared on the Council's radar, was a symbol of power, but not of recklessness. It was a tool that represented something far more profound: their control of the galaxy's vital systems. The Deathworlders' influence spread quietly at first. With subtlety and strategy, they began to take control of critical trade routes and star systems that were vital to the continued survival of the larger empires. These systems were not the heart of the galaxy's power, but they were the arteries that kept everything running. Without them, the great empires would falter, their economies would grind to a halt, their fleets would be stranded, and their citizens would grow restless. While the Council was distracted by its internal disputes, the Deathworlders turned their attention to the hubs of galactic trade and infrastructure. They carefully infiltrated these systems without firing a single shot. They didn't want to destroy the galaxy. They wanted to leverage it to their advantage. They simply cut off supplies to the empires that had taken too much for granted. Their resources and their access to power began to dwindle, and with it, their ability to maintain control. This move was brilliant in its simplicity. It was not about showing force. It was about showing that humanity had the ability to take what they needed without anyone being able to stop them. And when the Council leaders finally realized what was happening, it was already too late. Fleets were stranded with no way to resupply. Entire sectors had been rendered impotent as trade routes collapsed one by one. Desperation grew in the ranks of the Council as they scrambled to adapt to this new reality. They had tried to offer negotiations, they had tried to rally their fleets, but nothing seemed to work. Humanity wasn't interested in fighting the same way everyone else did. They didn't need to send ships to conquer worlds. They didn't need grand battles. They simply took what they needed and used the galaxy's own systems against it. As the Deathworlders tightened their grip on the galaxy's critical systems, the Council began to fracture even more. Some species tried to fight back, others began to form covert alliances with humanity, believing that joining their side was the only way to survive the growing chaos. The idea of peace now seemed like a distant dream, a fragile hope that was quickly being smothered by the harsh reality of the Deathworlders' actions. And then came the first sign that the Deathworlders were not just an unknown force, but a galaxy-shaping power that would no longer be ignored. They made a move that shook the Council to its core. They took control of a galactic hub, an ancient station known to all as a neutral ground where interspecies peace talks had been held for centuries. This was a bold declaration that humanity would not be a passive participant in the galaxy's future. They had claimed this strategic position as their own, and they sent a message to the galaxy that echoed louder than any war cry. Submit or face a future without us. With that, the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. The Deathworlders had not just become a force to be reckoned with. They had become the new center of the galaxy's future. The death grip the Deathworlders had placed on the galaxy tightened with every passing day. What had once seemed like a temporary challenge to the established powers had now become the undeniable truth of a new order. The Deathworlders had outsmarted the Council at every turn, taking not only their critical resources, but also their will to fight. The fleets of the great empires had scattered, their morale shattered by the realization that no one was safe, not even the mightiest. The Council had fractured beyond repair. The empires that had once cooperated within the framework of the Galactic Council now turned against one another in desperate attempts to cling to what little power they had left. The factions had begun to form, each with their own goals, but none with the strength to challenge the Deathworlders. There was talk of forming a counter-alliance, but it was too late. No one trusted anyone anymore. The humans, on the other hand, were as organized as ever. With their carefully planned strategies, they had not only decimated trade routes, but they had systematically dismantled key defense networks. The fleets of the galactic powers were stranded, cut off from one another by the deathly silence of humanity's reach. Systems that had once been fortified with the best military technology were now vulnerable to the smallest human sabotage. It wasn't just their enemy ships that failed. Entire planets had seen their communications cut, their infrastructure crumbling in the wake of the Deathworlders' advance. And humanity didn't stop there. They had carefully infiltrated political systems, subtly placing operatives in positions of influence. A few leaders had defected already, seeing the tide shift in favor of the Deathworlders, and they now worked from the inside to steer their governments towards submission. These quiet victories were often invisible to the outside world, but they were crucial in breaking down the resistance. Humanity had become a cancer to the Council, a species capable of quietly infiltrating, sabotaging, and collapsing empires from the inside without a single shot being fired. The real blow to the Council came when the Deathworlders targeted the heart of their political power. The Central Assembly, where the highest representatives of every empire gathered to negotiate and govern, was attacked not by military force, but through subversion. Without warning, a series of cyber attacks paralyzed the Assembly's defenses. Communications between council members faltered, and critical systems were hijacked. Key leaders were either assassinated or detained in mysterious circumstances, and no one could trust the information they received. In the chaos that followed, the Deathworlders' message echoed across the galaxy. Your time is over. It was simple, but effective. The message reached every corner of the galaxy, transmitted through every possible channel, every network that the Deathworlders had seized control of. There was no place to hide from it. The Council had collapsed, its fractured members scrambling to salvage what little remained of their power. The Deathworlders were not interested in the remnants of their empire. They had already won. Humanity had become the new power broker of the galaxy. Those who still resisted began to see the writing on the wall. Their fleets could no longer protect them, and their once powerful governments were now filled with treachery and betrayal. There were whispers of peace talks, but it was clear that humanity would not settle for terms they had not set. The Deathworlders had won not just by force, but by the sheer inevitability of their presence. They had fractured the unity of the galaxy, rendered the once unified council useless, and placed themselves at the center of a new galactic order. And as the galaxy reeled from the chaos, humanity stood poised to reshape it according to their vision. The fall of the Galactic Council was swift and irreversible. The great empires, once united under a fragile banner of diplomacy and shared power, had collapsed in on themselves, unable to withstand the quiet but relentless forces that humanity had unleashed. What remained were a fractured collection of star systems, each too weak and divided to resist the force that now dominated the galaxy, the Deathworlders. The final blow came when humanity took control of the Council's capital station, a massive structure that once stood as the symbol of galactic unity. The space station, once a bustling hub of political discussions and treaties, now lay under the silent watch of humanity's flagship, an indomitable presence that had obliterated any notion of neutrality. The galaxy's leaders, scattered and paranoid, had no place left to hide. They had tried everything to negotiate, to bargain for peace, but the Deathworlders did not play by the rules. Humanity had never wanted to be rulers of the galaxy. No, they sought something far more profound. A new order built on survival, and more importantly, control. Humanity wasn't here to conquer. They were here to reshape the very foundations of galactic power. They had seen how fragile the great empires were, how easily their alliances shattered when threatened. They had broken the illusion of invincibility that had kept the galaxy in a constant state of tension. The Deathworlders didn't need to conquer by brute force. They were the storm that unraveled the threads of an old world, ushering in a new one. The remaining resistance, led by a coalition of desperate leaders, attempted one final gambit. A desperate assault on the newly claimed human stronghold, a last-ditch effort to reclaim the center of power for themselves. But it was pointless. The Deathworlders had anticipated every move, and as their fleets gathered to face the attacking forces, the humans struck in ways that left no room for hope. Their tactics, once seen as clever, now seemed almost prophetic. They didn't need to win in battle. They needed to make the enemy defeat itself. And so, one by one, the remaining fleets were dismantled. Supplies vanished. Commanders betrayed their own leaders. Systems turned on one another. The resistance was broken, its will crushed under the weight of humanity's ability to turn their greatest strengths into weaknesses. In the aftermath, as the shattered remnants of the old empire tried to regroup, the Deathworlders did not demand their surrender. There was no need for that. They had already succeeded. What remained was an empire not of soldiers and conquest, but of influence. A subtle, pervasive power that controlled not just the weapons and fleets, but the very systems that kept the galaxy alive. Governments, once independent, now bent to humanity's will, whether by force or by quiet agreements. The Deathworlders had built something new, something the galaxy had never seen before, a balance of power not founded on brute force, but on control, manipulation, and inevitability. Their ship, the massive battleship that had first terrified the galaxy, was not just a weapon of war. It was a symbol of their dominion, a silent reminder that they had become the stewards of this new age. And the galaxy had learned the harshest of lessons. The Deathworlders were not just conquerors. They were the new architects of the universe. The old ways, the old empires, were gone. And what followed was a new world, a world in which humanity ruled, not through the might of their battleships, but through the quiet, deadly precision of their will. The Deathworlders had won the war, and now they would shape the galaxy according to their vision. And no one, no empire, no species could stand against them.